Okay, hello everyone and welcome to our bi-weekly webinar. Thanks for joining us today. So today Craig will be covering template components in Road-Eng, and we will be recording today's presentation, and we'll be sending you all a link so you can watch it again or pass it on to anyone who missed the webinar. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the question panel, and Craig or I will see them and answer them as soon as we can after we get them. Craig has control of the PowerPoint. There we go. So before we get going, just a little bit about us for those of you who are new. We're based in Vancouver, BC, and we have been in the corridor design industry for over 25 years. And at the core of our company is a very user-centric philosophy. So we focus on engineering and make our software very easy to use. And just a quick outline of what Craig will be covering today. Parameters, services, and point codes with template components, parameter overrides, reference features, and examples. So a very quick outline, and here are some our upcoming webinars. If you would like to sign up for them, here's a list of the next 3 we're going to be doing. And with that, I will pass on to Craig, and he will tell you about template components.
Thanks, Cam. Good morning, everyone. So today's seminar is going to be about, and interestingly, this is probably one of the hardest parts of Road-Eng for new customers. I think we typically find when we get a new customer going, we'll spend a bit of time with them to help sort out their template components. The good news is that once they're up and running with a handful of components that work for them, they're generally pretty happy with those ones, and they can modify them and tweak them as they go. But it is a tricky part of Road-Eng, so yeah, you can be expecting that. So I'm going to jump around quite a bit in this presentation just because I want to cover a lot of different topics. So as Cam mentioned, please type in your questions into the console as we go. I think it's probably better if you ask the questions at the time you think of them rather than wait to the end, because I'm going to be bouncing around a little bit. So let's just jump right in. Template components, they are the things that allow you to define your cross-sections. And if you're using other software like Civil 3D, they're analogous to assemblies and sub-assemblies and that sort of thing. So here I've got an example road. It's a couple of kilometers long, and it's got a rural cross-section template defined. And in Road-Eng, the way you create, adjust, and manipulate templates is in what's called the template editor. Edit templates, and this environment is sort of like an experimental area. If you hold the left mouse button down, you can move your template around, and you can see how the template's behaving in different situations. You can jump to a specific station and look at the template on that specific station. And in this environment, what we're doing, moving things around, is not having any effect on the design other than to review how your template's working. So you can say, well, if I was in cut in this section, I would have these ditches forming. If I got up into a fill situation, it would look like this, and so on. Yeah, it's a very easy way to review the behavior of your template. So what is a template? A template is a set of logic and geometry and rules that has a behavior that depends on its position and the ground information and other information. A template is made up of what we call template components. So this template here, the default template, is made up of you can see the left-hand side. It's highlighted there in magenta. It's the left-hand side of a roadway. There's the right-hand side. You've got ditches which aren't active now because we're in fill. If we came down here, you'll see the ditch component. So each of these is a component, and each of these components has behaviors and parameters. I'll just have a quick look at some of the parameters involved. So I click on the component, I go into properties for this type of component, and in this case I have ACP thick, which is a pavement thickness, pavement width, base thick, and as I move down through these parameters, you can see in the cross-section the software is trying to highlight what that parameter is affecting on the cross-section. That's just one component. We have a lot of components available. We have an eLibrary. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The eLibrary is constantly being updated, so it's a good idea to get new copies of the components regularly. Yeah, so we have all these components, and what we can do is to let's create a new template just to see how that process works. So one way of doing that is to copy an existing template and paste that as a new template. I've got a new template now. Let's just go in and change it a little bit. I'm going to call it new. My new template. You can see that with the template, which is the holder for the components, that you have some parameters. You can disable the volumes for a template. You can disable clearing and stripping, and you can set your crown slopes in the template. And you can also disable the super elevation being overwritten by the curved super, so you can fix the crown slopes on your template. So these parameters will apply to the objects inside the template. So we've created a new template. Let me just get rid of the components that I had in there and replace them with some other components. Let's go into our library entries here, and let's grab, oh, I don't know, let's grab Rural 4. By the way, you can look through these components. You can see they have quite different geometries, shoulder situations, all sorts of urban and rural details that you can get. And each of these is configurable. So there's quite a few options that are available in our basic libraries. So let me carry on, copy this rural component, place it in here, copy, paste as new. Most components have a left and a right side. So I'm going to go back to the original one that was there and delete it. Again, click on that component, copy it. I'll paste it onto the right. Now I've got a road, basic road object. Now I can go up into my components, find a ditch standard. That's a pretty good ditch to have. And I'm going to paste it onto the left side. It's not appearing because it's too high in fill. I'll just paste it onto the right side as well. And then finally, we'll grab a slope component. And there's all sorts of options here for different slope. I will just take a simple closing slope, copy that, and paste that onto left side and paste it onto the right side as well. It's quite often useful to do one side, get everything set up on one side the way you like it, and then just copy and paste it on the other. Because each one of these, you'll want a dimension to suit your situation, your ACP width, slopes, all these sort of things you would dimension to suit your needs. Once you've got one side done, you'll probably do it on the other. So I've created a new template. It looks quite different than the other template that I had here, which was my starting template. I've built it using these components, and I can adjust the components to do whatever I want, well, whatever they're capable of. So I've created a new template. Let's just now exit from the template editor with the new template. I'm not going to recalculate anything. I'm going to assign that template to a range of stations. So I do that in Edit, Assign Parameters by Range. Templates, the first tab here, and I had the default assigned to the entire road before. Now I'm going to choose my new template. There it is. And I can assign that either to the whole road, or I could maybe assign it to a range of stations if I wanted. I'll just assign it to the whole road. And there we go. We've got our new template assigned to the whole road. So that's the process. You create templates. The less you have, the better, of course. It's just simpler. You assign templates, and then you assign them to a range of stations. One thing to note here is that I have stripping going on. And stripping in Road Edge can be handled by a template, but it's much easier to handle stripping through an assignment, which is done in the same menu. Edit, Assign Parameters by Range, go into the Site Prep tab, and here I can assign stripping to different ranges of stations. And in this case, I've got a stripping depth of 0.5 meters, and I'm telling it to go from the slope stake base with a 0 offset on both left and right sides. And so that's what it's going to do. It's going to remove 0.5 meter of overburden out to the slope. If I wanted to add something there, maybe an extra offset from the slope stakes to strip to, I just make that change, recalculate, and we should see the stripping. So the stripping is dealt with on a special basis. It's a lot easier to deal with it in the Assign Parameters by Range than with the template. So lots of options here. Ideally, you want to find a template that works in all the situations that you have, which involves oftentimes having a smart template, a template that does certain things the way you want to do. But in the real world, you'll find situations where you just can't get the template to do exactly what you want. So you're faced with having to change it in some way. Let's just look at an example here for a second. I'm going to go back and reassign the default template. This is so I don't get confused, which isn't very difficult to do. I'm going to assign our default back to the whole road. And we'll look at, let's look at how we might widen the road down at this end. Just simply widen it. So the most straightforward way to do that is to go into Edit Templates, copy this template, paste it as new, and I'll change this one. I'm going to call it Widening Left. Oops. For those of you who use RoadEng, this might be a bit mundane, but bear with me for a second. Widening left, I'll go into this side and I'll widen the lane width. Let's go out to 7, so it's quite a bit wider. So I've got a widening left template now, and I'll come in and I'll assign that template to a range of stations. Widening left. Oh, I understand there's a question. Let me just finish my thought here. So I'll make this widening apply to 0 to 150. Press Add Edit. So now you can see we've got widening left 0 to 150 and default template beyond that. Let's just go ahead. I know there's a question pending. I'll come to you in a second. Press OK here, and we zoom in, and you can see what's going on. We've got station 0 to 150 wider road. and then a very abrupt transition. And I'll come back to this transition in a second. Let me just have a look at the question. Sorry. Okay, well, this font is too small for me. Is there an option to create a transition area between two different templates? Aha. Timely, very timely. I'm going to answer your question right this minute. Okay, so we've got a template here, and there's obviously an abrupt transition. That is not what we want. So we have a way to deal with that. We actually have several ways to deal with it. The most straightforward is to just assign a special transition template, which we call the taper template, to a section in between here. So let's go from 150 to 160. I'm going to place this taper template into. So now I've got widening 0 to 150, taper 150 to 160, and back to the default from 160 onwards. Press OK, recalculate, and there you can see it's transitioned between the two templates over that range of stations that I gave it. There is a bit of a catch with the transition template, and that is that the templates that you're transitioning have to be quite similar. If one of them is an urban section with sidewalks and stuff, and the other one is a rural template, and you try and transition between them, it's not going to do a very good job. So where you change from, completely different cross sections, the transitioning does not always work that well. And there are other ways to deal with that, but that's basically one way to transition. Okay, so that's the most straightforward way of dealing with forcing and changing the templates. Let's just again go back to our default for the whole road and have a look at another way of doing this. So I'm just going to reapply the default, get rid of all that stuff, recalculate it. We're back to the default for our entire road. By the way, all these techniques apply in other dimensions. For instance, if you had a deeper ditch template, you would see it in the profile and so on. Okay, so let's look at another way of widening the road which does not require creating another template. And oftentimes we actually see people, we get their files and we see people with hundreds of templates, literally. It's not the best way to do it. If you're just varying one parameter, there is an easier way to do it. And that is something we call parameter overrides. So if I open up this template and I go in here and I look at our roadway on the left, look at that component, and I've got these parameters. So I've got one that's called ACP width, which is my lane width, 3.5. If I click on the overrides button here, it takes me into a slightly different mode, and it's got this screen here where it's showing me at station 0 the override is the default. So it's using the template default, and at the end of the road it's the default. So what I can do is I can modify that. I can say, okay, I want to start with, let's go 7. I think that was what we did before. 7 at station 0. We'll override that value. And then I'm going to add another override. And this one's going to be at 150. And it's going to be 7. And I'm going to add yet another override to taper it back to the default at 160. So I'm going to go back at 160. And this should give us, if I didn't screw up, something similar to the multiple template approach. So 0, 7, 157, and anything in between it's going to linearly interpolate. So if I made 150 a bigger number, 10 say, then it would vary linearly between 7 and 10 in that station range. And back at 160, it's going to go back to 3.5. So let's just have a look at how that works. Press OK here. Press OK. And there we go. Same effect, but this time we still only have one template assigned, and we've just varied the width of the road. And this technique, you know, it's a little bit tedious, but you can control various parameters in the template explicitly that way without having to change templates. Let me just check here. I've got another question. Can the side slope follow an existing constraint within a particular zone, land acquisition? Yes, absolutely. Let me just repeat the question. The question is, can the side slope follow an existing constraint, like a right-of-way boundary or some land constraint? And the short answer is yes. And the way that's dealt with is we would choose a template component that does that. So I took, when I created the new template, I used just the default slope, but there are other slopes that will do things like stay within right-of-way, inside right-of-way here. Here's an example of one. Properties, you can give it a right-of-way offset, and it will stay inside that offset. There's other components that will, for instance, widen the ditch to get material and close to a right-of-way. Yes, there's lots of ways of doing that, and the way to do it is to choose a component that does what you want to do from our standard logarithm here. Yeah, slope to offset and so forth. Okay, I got another question. I'm sorry, these questions on my screen are in tiny, tiny, tiny font.
And you want me to read it out loud?
Okay, in templates, in very steep slopes, the OB layer can run off the page to the ground slope override. Yes, that's very true. Can you, in the template editor, get the cut slope to cut the OB layer at the top of the cut and ignore the ground type? Yes. Yes. That's very simple. And that is done by, let's look at the default template that most people would have, which I kind of skipped over a little bit. But if I just take a default template here, new one, another template. Okay, and I change these components out again, and I put in our standard roadway, which is sort of a legacy component, but it will appear a lot of times in your new designs. And delete this, and I'll grab the same thing. I won't bother with the ditch. Copy, edit, paste as new. Okay, in the default slopes component, there's a slope control called auto. And what auto means is use the ground slope. So if you've got one or two layers, and you've got your slope set to auto, it will change slope as it penetrates through those layers. And what the question is about is that if you have a layer, if you're on a steep side hill and you have a layer of overburden and it's got a very shallow fill angle, the slope will run away. So what you can do quite simply is to go in to your template and change that slope, set it to whatever you want here. So stop using auto and explicitly change that slope. I hope that answers your question. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to strip off the overburden, so you're into more competent material that have better angles. But yeah, having the slope controlled by material type is quite useful, and that's what this auto setting does here. Okay, if I didn't answer the question, call us or email us, and we'll be happy to go through that question in a bit more detail. This design is not the best to illustrate that because it's on pretty gentle ground. Okay, by the way, just in passing, the template editor, you've got all these templates and components and all this stuff, and you want to save them because you're going to reuse them. You can do that in here. You can save the table. You can save whichever components you want from the table, and then they can be reused in future sessions of RoadEng. Okay, let me just see a couple of other things I wanted to talk a bit about. Point codes. A very, very important part of templates is point codes. So if I look here, if I just hover on one of these vertices here, I should see, you can see down there it says codes, and it's got several that are kind of, I don't know, the main one there is REL. DBL might be interesting, but REL is certainly interesting. There's another template point code down there called DIL. So you'll find in most of our templates, those point codes are standard, RE, road edge, or edge of subgrade. DI will be ditch inside, and then it'll have a left or right designator after it. And there we've got DOL, and then SS, SSL, and SSR. Okay, what can we do with point codes? They're actually quite useful. One of the things that's easy to do is to display in our profile window a ditch line. So I'll go into the profile window and go to the options here, and I'll go to where it says template codes, click on that button, and I'll add a template code. I'll add the ditch inside left. There we go. We'll give it a color and a line type. And recalculate. So now you're going to see the sections of road where that point exists. So in here, obviously, if you look at a section here, it doesn't have any ditches. So yeah, and of course you can display these point codes in the plan view. Same thing, if you wanted to add point codes into the plan view, you could add a ditch line in the plan. Again, color, line type. And there we go. So you got ditch lines in the plan. So the point codes can be very useful. You can do things in the data window here. You can add point codes into the data window and get the coordinates of those points. So in summary, just about, or the useful points on the cross section have codes with them, edge of pavement, edge of slopes, and those codes can be used to draw in plan profile, or they can be exported through the data window. So that's very useful point codes. Another thing about templates that is very important is volumes. And yeah, these components, we can actually build these. These are customizable. It's a subject for another seminar. They're actually like miniature programs, and they generate surfaces and point codes and all this stuff. And if you ever get into customizing these things, you want to be very careful because you can affect your volumes. So you can see in this particular component, or in this template, that I've got some green area, red area, and so on. These are what we call template surfaces, or layers. And if I hover down here below the subgrade line, it's showing me what the material is. You can see it says fill subgrade, and I can shade that. So I can see that's subgrade fill, and I can kind of check what's going on with my cross sections using that shading. Similarly, I can shade some of the other areas, SRF1, and so on. So you can go through, and it's quite useful to do this sometimes, just check what volumes are being accounted for. So I'll turn off the fills, and I can do the same thing for cut. There's my subgrade cut, and I can move through and I can see where it is. And if you hover in the area, it will show you the area and the adjusted area, which is expanded or compacted. So it's a very useful way to, you've got your design, go through and check that it's calculating the right areas. I see we're running late. I should quit a few more things to go through here, but hopefully, if you this will be available in a video, and if you can't stay, the video will be available, but I'll just press on here. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is yet another way to control templates, and that's something that we call reference features. So reference features are three-dimensional features which can be used to sections. You can look at them in profile or plan, and you can also use those features to attach templates to. So let's go back to our widening road here. I'm going to just go into the template, remove the overrides which I put in there. So we'll be back to square one. There, just delete that, and set him back to default. Okay, so there's our road as it started, and I'm going to, I've got a terrain file with a reference feature in it that I'm going to bring in here. So I'll go into Module Setup, create the reference terrain and reference feature. First I have to specify a reference terrain, and it's going to be called road edges. Set this up already, so that's my reference terrain. And then in the road edges terrain, I'm going to pick, oops, I got the wrong terrain here, terrain. I'm going to pick a feature, which I'll be clear in a second what that feature is. So that feature is a widened lane feature. So it's the edge of, turn the stuff off. It's actually this point on the left-hand side, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this point on the template to that feature to give me a widening in that area. Another way of doing it. Is that clear? So this feature here has come from a file that I created, and I'm going to attach my template to follow this feature. If you were generating something oddly shaped, this might be the best way to do it, is to use a reference feature. So I'll go into my templates, back here to default template, go into the properties and choose my ACP width. And here, here I've got, and you need to have this in the template, you've got an option to tie to a feature. Some variables won't let you tie to a feature, but this one, I can tie the width of the template to a feature, and I'll choose reference feature 1, and I'll go ahead with that. So now when it finds reference feature 1, it'll tie to it. And let's just see what that does. And there you can see these are the blue lines are the road edges. This is the edge of lane feature, which is tied to it. So the road edges have done the same thing that we did the other two ways. So it's a third way of doing it. Yeah, reference features can be used to tie ditches, to tie edges of road, all sorts of things. But yet another option. Okay, the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is some of the components and examples of the components. So let's go back into the template editor, and I'm going to go to the internet and grab, or first of all, have a look at what's out there on the internet. Click on the eLibrary button, and as I mentioned before, this library is constantly being changed. We're constantly adding, updating, and enhancing this library, so it's growing. And I would definitely, if you've got components in your design, I would refresh them from copies from the internet frequently. So what are all these things? There's some information about them in a page. Let's call that up here. And there is some resources there that describe all the different components that are available, and you click on these. It talks about the parameters and all the default characteristics of those components. And so if you're looking to do something special, this is a good starting point. We often will help clients in this area of the program build components, especially if they are something that's reusable. And this is in fact how our eLibrary grows. So that's our eLibrary out there. And to load those components, I just select them, press OK, and it prompts me to override the ones that I already have. And now I have a fresh set of components from the internet. And let's just have a look at some of the more common ones. What did I think? This one, particularly in Alberta, Saskatchewan, flatter ground, they have a component that's commonly used called the undercut component, and it's called a subcut component. And here it is here. I'll just copy this component out of the standard library and place it at the bottom. Usually I got the wrong component. This one is wrong. There's two subcut components. Subcut under subgrade is the one I want. If you're from Alberta, this one should be your familiar subcut. And the depth is 0.6, but it's measured from the component attachment point. So I think I have to make this a little bit bigger because I've got some materials above it. So I'm going to say 1.3. I'm not sure, whatever. And there you can see that component. And there's the cut material. And as I move it down, it's cutting more. But it won't cut above the subgrade line. So that's one sort of component that's very useful. Another one that's used quite a bit is just simply a right-of-way component, which is under miscellaneous components here, and right-of-way. Copy this component, come up to our template, paste it into our template, and there it is there. And then you can set the offset. And this one, of course, you could tie it again to a reference feature if you had a reference feature for your right-of-way line. So, yeah, that's a pretty common one. Yeah, so there's our right-of-way line, and this has got a point code on it, so you can display it in plan or profile, what have you. It's good to see on the section. Other components that are used quite often, someone already mentioned the staying within right-of-way. There's lots of slope options. To give you an idea, slope by fill height. So this one it's just showing the slope part of the component, not the road. But as you raise up here, you'll notice the slope became gentler, and that controlling that height is done as a parameter in that component. So we have a cut slope, and then fill height 1, fill height 2, fill height 3, and then fill slopes corresponding to each of those 3 heights. So that's a fairly common one. Benches, that's used from time to time. I wouldn't say it's common, but so there's a component that will do your benches. And again, you specify the bench height and the bench slopes and the configuration you want. Slope 3 legs, here's one that's, you can just set the slope, and I believe it looks like it's a horizontal distance for each of the legs, and it will behave like that. Yeah, clear zone, so you can specify a clear zone, and so on. So that is, I think, about all I wanted to cover. I've gone overboard a bit on time, but I think that's all I want to cover for today. Cam.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. And as I said at the beginning, the webinar has been recorded, so I will be sending you all a link who missed the webinar. And with that, we'll say goodbye and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.